Radio shock jocks JV and Elvis were fired from CBS Radio after a prank call they made in an overly exaggerated Asian accent. Here's the point tonight. Whether you like it or not, or want to admit it or not, free speech is under fire. But this is not about corporate responsibility. I believe it's about personal responsibility. And here's how I got there. The actual joke in question isn't really that funny, but it's something that every DJ on every top 40 station has made since Bob Hope was on the air. This is what happened. Shock jocks Jeff Vandergriff and Dan Lay broadcast a call to a Chinese restaurant and then embellished their accent. They placed an order for shrimp-fried lice. The caller claimed that he was a student of Kung Fu and compared menu items to employees' body parts, and the laughs, I guess, ensued. When the bit was originally broadcast, nothing happened. Nobody called and complained. It was only after a rerun had aired, after Don Imus was fired, that an Asian group began campaigning for their dismissal. And it wasn't just one group. And in the age of Imus, those groups got their wish. Shock jocks like JV and Elvis are a reflection of our society. If they weren't hugely successful, then nobody would have hired them to begin with. It wouldn't have been worth any kind of risk. But the fact is, millions of people tune into this stuff, and it in turn makes millions of dollars. Remember the saga of Opie and Anthony? Remember these guys? About 5 years ago, they had a radio stunt where they encouraged a couple to have sex and then describe it in great detail in St. Patrick's Cathedral. Their bosses at CBS Radio tried to do the right thing, I guess, and fired them. Well, guess what happened next? Their ratings at CBS went into the crapper. So how did they fix it? They rehired Opie and Anthony. The ratings went back up. More money comes in. Shareholders are happy. In a capitalist society, there's nothing more corporately responsible than that. If you're really offended, I mean really offended, why don't you exercise some personal responsibility? Translation, if you don't like it, turn the damn thing off. This recent outcry over shock jocks is not being driven by the American people. You're consuming this garbage. If you take a look all across America, including the heartland, these types of shows exist, and not just on radio. If you watch television lately, so why is radio the target, I wonder? Special interest groups have circulated a list of all the radio hosts who are on their radar. Guess what? Guess who's on the top of the list? People like me, Rush Limbaugh, and Sean Hannity. Gee, I can't recall the last time I encouraged listeners to have sex in a church. Oh, wait, I remember. Never. This thing is not being driven by standards. It's being driven by special interest groups. Why is it that someone can't do an Asian accent, but it's okay to say in a mock Southern accent, "Last night I was making out with my sister," and nobody complains? I'll tell you why. Because white Southerners don't have a special interest group. And you know why? Because if they did have one, they'd again be called racist. So here's what I know tonight. When it comes to political speech, more, not less, equals better. If someone on TV or radio is doing something you find offensive, it's not corporate responsibility, it's your responsibility to turn it off. If you stop consuming it, I promise you, they'll stop broadcasting it. So here's what I don't know. Will I or any other voices on the right get fired soon as a part of this politically correct witch hunt? Joining me now is Debbie Wolf. She's the co-founder of People Against Censorship, and Michael Harrison. He's the editor and publisher of Talkers Magazine. Debbie, I want to start with you. What did I miss? These two firings, I believe, only embolden these small special interest groups, don't they?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me on.
Sure.
I wanted to applaud for you as you were speaking, because you're saying something that just isn't being said for some reason. There isn't attention to this side of the argument. It's been more than two firings, by the way. There's been firings all across the country and other threatened firings going on as well. And every interest group that's been coming out of the woodwork is saying, well, Al Sharpton achieved it, Al Sharpton did it, I'm going to do it too. They're actually coming out and saying that as they're making their pitch.
Michael, let me go to you. I mean, you're a guy who studies radio. I've been saying on the radio since Imus, radio, look out. when this starts to come, the replacement devices are already there. You've got satellite radio, you have iPod, you have the internet. This is not driven by the people. They're not wanting these standards imposed. These are special interest groups, and if people lose that, they'll just move it over to someplace else. This product will be found.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. It's just going to hurt terrestrial broadcasting, which is regulated by the FCC, AM, FM, VHF, and UHF broadcasting. But you can't stop free expression. You can't stop free speech. It's just going to go elsewhere. However, I think that a lot of these special interest groups in cahoots with the government would love to be able to regulate all broadcasting, satellite broadcasting. They'd love to get their hands on the internet if they can figure out a way to do that too.
Michael, how much of this do you think is driven by that the end goal really is, again, the fairness doctrine, where you had to balance everything you said? If you did right, you had to do left. So I guess if you had, some of these shock jocks on, you'd also have to have the church lady on. I don't know. But they can't pass it through Congress. People don't support it. How much of this do you think is just a grand design by some of these people?
I think it's a grand design by some of the people, but I don't think it's really what's motivating it. What I think is motivating it is the age of the internet, the age of the special interest group, and the age of mass big-time media capitalizing on this and broadcasting it and amplifying it, because it makes her entertaining sensationalist copy, if you will. Even the fact that we're talking about it now.
Debbie, when did we lose sight in America that sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me? When did we become these wishy-washy, pansy little girls that just can't handle any kind of speech?
Somebody decided that they could get a platform by just drawing attention to a couple of words that hurt somebody's feelings. We don't have a right not to get our feelings hurt in this country. And like you said, we're talking about second-grade humor here. To have a national movement, to have somebody fired from the airwaves because they made what essentially comes out to a pee-pee joke that every second grader in the country is making is absolutely absurd. People need to get a thicker skin.
Debbie, I have to tell you, because I'm watching this obviously closely, because I am for a while. I think I've been bumped down to number 6. I was number 1 on the hit list. And, I think this is a dangerous thing that is starting to happen in America. And I'm watching this speech, and I have been called, since Imus, I've been called the chief, I think it's the chief maligner of Mohammed and Islam. Today there was something that came out that said that I was a racist, bigot, all these kinds of things, just because I say that 10% of Islam has been radicalized and 90% of Islam is good. And I noticed the change in the language. It's almost as if these groups are positioning the language and changing the language to control the argument here. Do you see a blacklist kind of scenario coming, a McCarthy or a witch hunt coming?
It's not just coming, it exists. And it's really frightening to me that other broadcasters don't see this. When I see somebody like Mancow going on the air and speaking out against fellow broadcasters, it physically makes me ill. How does any broadcaster not see that this is going to affect their livelihood and their future? How any musician or comic isn't standing up with outrage they should be afraid for their livelihood. They should be afraid of their ability to continue practicing their art.
I tell you, I saw when Tom DeLay came out against Rosie O'Donnell, I said, I'm a conservative. Tom, ain't with you on this one. And that we should all be standing together. You're exactly right. Michael, final question for you. I read an article in the New York Times where they talked about all this, all the sex stuff that's going on, but they were monitoring, shock radio. And Mancow was one of them. And the shocking things that he said was, if America doesn't wake up, my children will probably be dead because they'll be forced to wear a burqa in some extreme Islamic state. How is that compared to shock jock radio?
It's all so random. It's so subjective. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's chaotic. And the best thing we could do is be an open society and turn off what we don't like, live, and let freedom of expression ring.
Okay. Michael, Debbie, thank you very much. Now, my next guest is one of those shock jocks, the host of the third most listened to radio show in the country, Shock Jock Glenn Beck. And welcome to the program. So. Just a quick correction here. I'm not a shock jock. I do a conservative talk radio show every day.
Right,
I don't think I should be lumped in with the other. Sure, you're entitled to your opinion here, but we only have about 30 seconds. What do you have to say to your critics who say that shock jocks like you thrive on the controversy, go out of their way to say the most shocking, vile, repugnant things? Let me just make a correction here. Again, I'm not a shock jock. Yeah. I'd like to make that very clear. All right, thank you very much. Sorry we're out of time. That was shock jock Glenn Beck. Coming up now, the ultimate hot seat for presidential hopeful Mitt Romney. Did you see 60 Minutes?